Order, order. Welcome everyone to this, our third session on our evidence on the national security strategy. Can I welcome our witnesses today? But maybe I could just start by saying, unfortunately, we are still awaiting one of our witnesses who seems to have not quite made it yet. We're trying to track them down, but it's more important that we crack on with the session. And as and when he joins us, there will be some questions maybe we can put specifically to him. But perhaps I could ask Lord Harris for you to just introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Toby Harris. I'm a member of the Other Place, or the House of Lords, because it's a joint committee, and I chair the National Preparedness Commission. Do you want me to say anything about the National Preparedness Commission, or are you happy with that?
That's fine, thank you. Lord, and Captain Ravanti?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Captain Juha Ravanti, I'm the Defence Attaché of Finland to both United Kingdom and Ireland.
Thank you. Terrific. Maybe if I could start with you, Lord Harris. And obviously the government has been speaking for some time, before the last election and since, about the need for a whole-of-society approach to developing resilience and is establishing new national resilience goals. What do you see as being the most critical factors to ensuring a resilient society, and where does the UK currently fall short?
Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing to say is the national security strategy is quite clear that it warns that unless you've got security, unless you've got societal and resilience within your home country, you simply cannot deliver economic growth, and that's the basis on which everything else follows. The strategy recognises the need to increase preparations for potential threats on the horizon, and that includes pandemics, energy and supply chain disruptions, climate change, food security, and so on. It also recognises that the vital importance of long-term actions to build national resilience and to reduce our reliance on others, anticipate and prepare for new risks. So, if you like, resilience and preparedness are vital components of the strategic defence by denial in terms of where we stand at the moment.
Do you think we're late at getting to this? We've had so many attacks, sort of through cyber attacks and so on. We've had the pandemic, as you just alluded to. But you look at Marks and Spencers, you look at Jaguar Land Rover in just recent weeks. These are having a huge economic cost to us.
Absolutely, and certainly
Haven't we done it before?
My view is we should have been started before. I am pleased that the previous government did begin this journey. I'm pleased that the present government is continuing that journey. But in my view, we have a considerable way to go. And as was recognised in the Strategic Defence Review, there needs to be a national conversation so that people, that the general public, that businesses, that every organisation understands why this is such an important agenda. And it's only if you have every level of government, every organisation, large and small, business, private and public, and every community and indeed every individual household engage with this process, that you will be able to adequately have a sort of herd immunity against whatever the threats might be. And I think that's where we're falling short. We've still got an awful long way to go.
And what do you think the public sector needs to do to make sure it's more resilient?
Well, the first, there are so many elements of that. I mean, you mentioned cyber specifically. We need to up our game on cyber. But the whole point about upping our game on cyber is that you have to prepare for failure as well as simply hope it's not going to happen because you put in mitigation effects. So we need to think, what do we do when a major public organisation or a major public data set has been compromised? How do we recover from that? How do we make sure that the core functions of the nation are maintained under those circumstances? So that requires a different mindset. It requires a different mindset that we need to go away from what has been, if you like, the philosophy over the last 50, 60, 70 years of the sort of just-in-time mentality of increasing efficiency, removing duplication, and so on, towards one which looks much more at just in case. How do we manage in the event of one of our major strands of activity being compromised or disrupted?
Thank you. Can I just, Brigadier General Reba, thank you for joining us. Sorry if you had troubles getting here today. Just keen to hear from yourself and then Captain Ravanti, just about when it comes to a whole of society approach, your experiences in your respective countries, and what can the UK learn from them? So starting with you, Brigadier General Reba.
Thank you. For us, this is more existential threat because we are living in a neighborhood where our neighbor is really aggressive. That means that we were looking for a long time to prepare not only the nation for the war, but also the people, our citizens, but also the local communities. And a lot of work is actually done in the local community level, where we are working together with local governments in order to enhance their capability to withstand the crisis. And what we have found out is that, especially during the peacetime, the good modus operandi is use the volunteers. And we have a significant volunteers organization financed by the governments, but run by the volunteers themselves. And they have been supported by the defense forces and other national agencies. That means that, let's say, the rescue has their own volunteer force, but mainly defense related assets are financed and supported by the defense ministry, who's pretty much in lead of running the defense pool in Estonia.
Thank you. Captain Ravanti?
Yeah, on top of what Lord Harris and my Estonia colleague here said, I would highlight a couple of things. Firstly, okay, we all know that you can't forge culture. It takes ages to write it down to really make it into the society in a way that people, not just the elite, but also the ordinary citizen, understand their own role in national resilience. We have approached this by extensive training. So we train people in many separate levels, not just the mandatory military service for male population, which not just brings kind of a resilience and military capability to many of our citizens, but it also brings the military and kind of a connection between the military and the population. You see military everywhere all the time. Then we train our regional level players, members of local parliaments or branch heads, division heads in the local governments. We train them. They know how the system works. And the crown jewel is the national defense courses, which is 3.5-week courses for hand-picked people, the present and future leaders of our nation. So everybody knows the role of separate ministries. Everybody knows the role and capability of National Emergency Supply Agency, and they know the civilian company's role in supporting the agencies.
How long has that been in place?
We've had, I think we started doing the national military courses roughly in the 1950s, and so we're talking about good 75, 80 years. We've run so far more than 250 of those courses, plus some 60, 70 special courses. For example, we arranged in 2025, early this year, we arranged the first special course for foreign citizens who are permanently stationed in Finland and working, for example, the leadership of some global companies who work in Finland.
Thank you. It must be my hearing, but if you could just speak a little bit closer to the microphone, that would...
I will do my best.
Thank you very much. Lord Tunnicliffe?
When it comes to scrutinising preparedness plans, the government has rejected the COVID Inquiry's recommendation for an independent statutory body in favour of a panel of experts convened by the Resilience Academy. Is this sufficiently robust? And indeed, the structures that are emerging, are they going to be capable of handling emergencies which by definition are unknown, not only in severity and form, but also in timescales? What do you think, Lord Harris, about the, let's call it the machinery of government when it comes to emergency preparedness? And do you think it's fit for purpose?
I think the short answer is that there's a lot more that should be done in terms of the machinery of government. I mean, the problem is that the short-term political necessities, the immediate policies that any government will have, are going to get squeezed out, are going to squeeze out and displace efforts to improve long-term national resilience against crises that aren't currently happening. So that's a real dilemma. So how do you institutionalise it? One mechanism, which, for example, was embodied by the Climate Change Act, which created an independent committee essentially to scrutinise what government was doing on climate change, with a remit to report and identify shortcomings or areas where more needed to be done. A model like that, I think, was essentially what Lady Hallett was recommending in her Module 1 report. The government's response is that it doesn't think that's a good idea. I suppose no government, whatever its political shade, ever likes somebody else marking their homework. But what they are proposing is that instead there should be a series of short-term, one-off expert groups convened under the UK Resilience Academy, which is a bit of a change in the role of the UK Resilience Academy, who will then look at specific topics over the space of 3 years, with perhaps 12 of them meeting over a 3-year period. Now, I don't think myself that's a useful thing to be doing, but I don't think that's necessarily a substitute for a standing body with expertise which is going to be looking at the full range of issues. Because let's remember that we need to tackle these threats on a systemic basis. They will often interact, they will often engage with each other, and simply picking one topic off at a time, convening an expert group, that's helpful, but it doesn't solve the systemic problem.
I wonder if General Rebo and Captain Ravanti could comment on how different their systems are from those apparently exposed in this conversation.
Want to go first?
Okay.
Okay, so I think so. You hit the nail with your question, because even though we think ourselves as a superpower of resilience, but during the COVID time, I have to say that we were faced to the fact that our system is not built into having this kind of a single body who would have the authority to operate. And our constitution is very much sector driven, so you have to have the minister in place. So we had all the time at least 5 ministers in a row in front of the TV cameras explaining and making decisions. So it was somewhat painful. So even our president, he took it up at that time. Our government was not ready to adopt that during the COVID, but we are trying to make changes. We have a study going on in Finland. What if we could have a body under the Ministry of under the Prime Minister's office? So change our constitution slightly to enable having this one single body that could be active and operate in dire circumstances.
In Estonia, we improved the law to fight the war, but that was really convenient for the COVID as well, because we had a Premier Minister in the charge, and then very strong regional commands, basically. And we have a law what says that we have a supporting agencies and support aid. That means that the health agency was supported by everybody else. That's including the volunteer where I was working, we were sending additional people in support of additional agencies did the same. The huge part was that the nation is also, in the case of Estonia, not only exercising but making systemic planning. And that means that if you are making plan for, let's say, different kind of events, eventually you have a, let's say, playbook, you know each other capabilities, and in regional level or at local level, you know what each agency can bring to the table. Same goes with the national level. And that was a huge help in the case of COVID and preparedness and acting up in Estonia. Thank you.
Lord Watts.
Lord Harris, the explanation of the government policy for resilience seems to me very strange, in the sense that I think what we learned from COVID and defence changes that have taken place and the threat from new viruses is that they can come at any time. To have 3-year strategy seems to me a very civil service way of looking at life, that there's an immediate threat on all of those, whether it be cyber or whether it be viruses or whether it be defence. And I'm just struggling to know whether anyone has set up anything yet to actually monitor these and come up with some recommendations now, rather than wait for for 3 years to actually do that.
Well, I mean, we've been the government has now published a resilience action plan. You'll notice actually in the strategy it talks about a resilience strategy, but and that would be imminent. And 2 or 3 weeks later, what was produced was in fact a resilience action plan. Now, my concept of a strategy, you may have different views, is that you start by agreeing what your baseline capability was, how resilient you already were, what you were able to withstand, where the shortfalls were. Whether you put all this in the public domain is a separate issue, and that you would then work out all the things you needed to do to get to a reasonable standard over a foreseeable future. Now, that's not what the action plan does. It lists a whole number of very valuable actions on their own basis, but it's not that comprehensive approach looking at the full range of threats that might be faced. And that's why you need to build in some nudge factors to make sure that government continues to do this and continues to keep that important. I mean, one of which, of course, is within Parliament. And this committee, this joint committee, for example, could be that body if that was what the parliamentary authorities were prepared to give it the resources to do.
Boateng.
I wonder if you can help us, Brigadier General Rebo and Captain Ravanti, on the issue of reconnecting the British public and British society with defence. I mean, I was born at a time in which national service still existed. War comics were part of my childhood reading. I then was grew up in, went to school on a council estate in Hertfordshire during the Cold War, when we still had cadets and at university officer cadets. Britain has changed, and all of that seems so much more distant now. We don't have the advantage you have of being constantly reminded of danger. If you live next door to a bear, you're more likely to be conscious about the need to protect yourself from attack. So how do you suggest that we in Britain, where we are today, might better make our public aware of the role defence plays in keeping them safe from national security risks?
I will not see, first of all, advantage living next to the Russia. That's not very huge advantage, sir. The second thing is, like my Finnish colleague said, this is about education. And we were lucky to have the defense, and I'm not talking only about the military. Defense has many layers, and in Estonia we understand that defense is also cyber, what was mentioned, but also psychological defense and so on. And we have a defense lessons at school, at high school, where we talk openly about the threats, and we are talking about the different kind of defense what we have. civilian defense, cyber defense, many layers of defense. We have 48 hours to talk with our high schoolers, and that's going to the trade school as well. We have then 48 hours to go to field and do some of the things to show the people the field crafts as well. That means that we have an educational part of this. But as our Finnish colleague said, this is really important to teach every kind of leaders who are taking care of their companies or their local governments. And this education is much wider and need to be very systematic in the way that the different people and different agencies will support, including the educational part of the government and local communities. I would rather invest to the education.
May I come in?
Lord Harris, yes.
I mean, first of all, other countries do a lot more in terms of public education and public engagement. So in Sweden, there is the If Crisis or War booklet. If Crisis or War Comes, which is a booklet which goes to every household. It's just been reissued following NATO entry. I think in Finland you have the Home Preparedness manual and the 72-hour campaign. How would you run your household if this wasn't available for 72 hours, no water, no electricity, or whatever else it might be? I think Poland has just done something similar. Norway has an annual emergency preparedness week with specific content aimed at children and conversation guides for family members. Denmark has a folder which has been emailed to all Danes. So there's a lot more going on. In this country, we have, if you can find it on the gov.uk website, the section on how would you prepare for an emergency. Now that contains helpful advice, but it's actually rather low key, and I rather suspect that in a time of emergency that's the last thing that people would find. So you have to keep reinforcing these messages over time, which is presumably why in the Strategic Defence Review they called for this national conversation, really to talk to the public, to talk to the wider outside government world in terms of the need to address these issues.
And Finland?
Yeah, okay. A couple of additions to the good words both these gentlemen said. I think you have most of the bits and pieces together already, because you're talking openly, you're giving public very good, accurate information on how the threat is developing, how UK is willing to take leadership in support of Ukraine and European partnership with NATO and so on. So you're doing many things right, as I see it. One thing I would like to highlight here, because I have to say that it hasn't always been this way in Finland. It hasn't always been this popular in Finland. I'm really talking about the fact that we have more volunteers, for example, joining the military academy now than ever before. And it's only been getting better for us after Russian invasion to Ukraine. But one key fact is that our population knows that we treat our military extremely well. They are well trained, they are well equipped. The morale in the armed forces is really good. So the kind of a media profile of the armed forces is really high, and I think that plays a significant role in how the population is happy and really proud of our armed forces.
By way of supplementary, and maybe you can help us with this in terms of the UK, but budgets. If you've got the Department of Health having a role in resilience, and you've got local government having a role in resilience, the Department of Education in terms of defence and defence awareness. Lord Harris, how do you see the funding of these different strands incentivising joint work and effective spending in terms of outcomes for the money applied? And how do you best assess success in terms of public readiness for crises, and including armed conflict?
Well, with deference to the former cabinet secretary around this table, I don't think the UK government has for many years been terribly good at cross-departmental working, and there is a real issue that if you look at any individual government department, the priority they will put, if you talk about the education department, for example, the priority that they will put on educating young people and then right through life on resilience and preparedness will probably fall rather lower between, for example, sorting out the problems on people with special educational needs or whatever else it might be. And if you go through every single government department, they will have their own departmental priorities, which will be higher than that. Somehow, you've got to find a way of putting all that together and saying, but as a nation, we need each of you government departments to do these things, even though it may fall below the immediate threshold of your priorities. And I think that's particularly important given the current turbulence and uncertainty that we face in the world, not only in terms of Russia and other international threats, but also in terms of the increasingly frequent and extreme weather events that we're getting.
Ernst Kidron, briefly, if you could.
Yeah. I was very struck that both the Brigadier and the Captain mentioned regional and the importance of regional conversations. And I wondered, Lord Harris, whether you've put much thought into the mayors and their relationship to their local population and whether that's a good place to have a conversation about this.
Well, our current structure is based on a network of local resilience forums, which are, for historic reasons, based around police force areas. So in some cases, that coincides neatly with the strategic, the remit of a strategic mayor, but in many cases it doesn't very well. I think you've got to recognise that senior elected leaders, like the elected mayors, should be part of this process of leading this national debate and making sure that things are happening in their locality. But at the moment, I think thought has started to go into whether you would need to reconfigure this network of local resilience forums to bear in mind the government's devolution agenda. But I've not seen, again, that much progress has been made on that.
Ernest Fall.
Thank you very much. I'm just sticking on the resilience piece. Recently, obviously, the spending on NATO went up to 5%. 1.5% of that was targeted at a sort of wider resilience, or maybe too wide. So I was curious to know what you thought about that, what you thought about it in relation to Britain, and what sort of priorities you would place amongst the many different things that we could prioritise, from sort of energy to food to infrastructure. Lord Harris, starting with you.
I think there is a danger that the 1.5%, which is for resilience, may be treated as a creative accountancy exercise by governments, not just in this country, but everywhere else, so that, for example, routine maintenance of critical infrastructure will end up being categorised. We've met our 1.5%. The reality is we've got an ageing infrastructure. Much of it was constructed in the 19th and maybe the earlier 20th centuries. It's often been, in fact, more frequently than not, inadequately repaired and maintained. It's highly fragmented. It's vulnerable to systemic failure. There's a maintenance backlogs have been allowed to grow. And of course, it was all designed to cope with climate parameters far more favourable than the ones we currently have. So there is a huge amount which we should be doing in terms of resilience. And that's before you start talking about raising the general capacity of the country to respond to extreme shocks of one sort or another. And I think that's the difficulty that we face. So I'd like the 1.5% to be additional, but I'm sure that will cause problems with the Treasury.
And should we be accelerating that programme, given what you just said about, particularly about climate?
My view is that is essential. If you think, for example, the 1953 floods, North Sea floods, came perilously close to flooding the financial and political districts of London. It took 30 years after that for the Thames Barrier to be constructed, and that's the sort of timescales that we're looking on. But we're probably now in a situation where one ought to be saying, is the Thames Barrier itself sufficient? Is there enough there? Have we got other mitigations that we need to put in place? Yet if it's going to take 30 years to decide, what are the climate conditions, what are the risks that are going to be there in 30 years' time? I think the assumption was that the Thames Barrier would be raised once or twice a year. I think it's been raised more than 200 times.
Absolutely. Any thoughts, Brigadier General, on the 1.5%?
We are going to spend most of to the military. And in our spending structure, because we were talking about the systematic planning, that's every agency's responsible for their spending planning, and so that is pretty much at the Premier Minister and the Parliament level facilitated that they will really go and look through. Especially the Parliament Commission are looking how the money is spent and what kind of results were achieved. But for us, really important is that we do understand what kind of resource is in regional, in local, but also in national available. And a lot of resources you actually can use for the different kind of operations or different kind of rescue operations. And that's dual use is something what we are really looking and going open even about what military does, what the police does, what the rescue board is available. And that's something what we are really working in. Are we good in this one? We can improve, but also we are looking about how to solve some of those problems in academical fields. Those problems are so serious, especially with the budgets and preparedness, that we are seriously looking and thinking through in the academical lens those problems as well.
Yeah, we don't really have decisions on anything, how to spend that 1.5%, but most likely we will be investing together with Norway and Sweden to military mobility and logistical support up in High North. There's literally no way of using the current railways and roads up there to support troops maneuvering from the Norwegian coast to the eastern border of Finland, and the infra it just isn't there. But of course there will be additional funding into cybersecurity. There will be probably new storage facilities and things like that for military purposes.
Thank you.
Also enabling the local civilian life. Thank you, some extent.
Yeah, carrying on the same line, what we have in Europe at the moment is we have a war raging which crosses between the Western Front, people living in trenches, it's covered in mud, and high-tech drones and other things being used against them. So, I mean, it's a really bloody war and much closer to you two than it is to us at the moment. Do we think the 10-year goal for the 1.5%, but actually, do we think the spending is being given sufficiently urgent attention? I mean, after all, the Second World War went on for 6 years, and we're talking about a 10-year window here, which seems to me to be a little bit short, a little bit long. Toby, what do you think?
I'm quite struck by the fact that whenever I talk to people in our military, they are talking about expecting potentially widespread war in Europe within a very short time frame, 3-4 years. If you talk to people who are experts on China, they will say they expect some sort of action in terms of a blockade or otherwise to Taiwan within the next 2 years. Now, Taiwan produces, I think it's 98% of the most important semiconductors that we need as a nation. That would have massive implications. So the degree of urgency with which we need to face some of this, and then when you factor in, and you Mr. Chairman, have mentioned several times the cyber threats that we face, but we are getting sabotage attacks, we're getting all sorts of and we've had assassinations on British territory. There is a lot happening already in addition to the cyber sabotage that we've seen. And of course, the advantages of those sorts of things is they are eminently deniable. How do you prove that that was a state action? Well, it walks like a state action, it quacks like a state action, and so on. But nonetheless, proving that is obviously more difficult.
Would our NATO allies think that the preparedness of NATO as a whole, looking at a 10-year window, is enough?
We are in different tracks because we are in the different tracks because the sovereign states are taking their own actions and also putting their money for the different projects. As far concerning my country, that we are investing a lot of readiness and preparing not only for the drone warfare, but looking also the air defense and other capabilities. And that's something what we are investing heavily. We are taking some risk and working sometimes with the different companies and procuring weapons from the different companies. What's probably is not so convenient logistically, but if the delivery times will bring us closer to time, that's something what we are doing. So we have some different artillery systems, different air defense systems what are already procured and will come to the Estonia really soon. That means that we are speeding up, putting up our preparedness and readiness.
Do you think NATO allies should be doing more as well?
The NATO is collective. The collective have a the NATO as collective organization have different issues, different problems. I hope that everybody is doing their best.
What about the Finns?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I'd like to make 2 points. Firstly, I'll go with my colleague here. The war we see in Ukraine, of course, technology is developing quite rapidly, and that's what we see from that war. But it's not the only threat, and we have to be very precise so that we get the right lectures or right lessons out of the war. The way they fight the war in Ukraine is kind of the only way Russia can fight it, and NATO would fight that war in totally different way. So let's remember that. That's one thing. The other thing is of course I think there should be more urgency placed into funding and getting this 1.5% into use. One thing you can't build when or at least it would be very painful to build is your industrial base when someone is shooting at you. So we need to hurry up that.
Indeed.
Thank you. Lord Hutton.
Can we turn to the question now of home defence and the role of the reserve forces? And perhaps this is a question for Brigadier General Rebo. The UK Strategic Defence Review has called for new legislation here in Britain to mobilise reserves and industry if a crisis escalates into conflict. Based on your own experience, what are the key measures that can improve and speed up mobilisation processes?
The use of volunteers, the preparing reserves timely, and that means that if you have a systemic reserve build-up mobilization plan, basically, like in old good days when the armies were preparing to mobilize, there was a plan for how to mobilize not only the army but industries and support behind them. And in the modern world where we're seeing that a lot of services is outsourced for the companies, they work with the companies. And we are working, like my Finnish colleague also said, together with the civilian companies in order to use their help. If we are looking already how significant logistical effort will be in the conflict, that's need to be involving not only the industries but also everybody in the supply chain and so on. But the part is that going that we have informational and command and control systems, including with the different kind of companies to understand what's going on and that we can provide very clear and very fast information exchange and keep people in the loop what needed to be done and how we are building up not only informational clear view but also understanding what actually needed to be done, and that's going through the planning.
Okay. And a question for both you and Captain Ravanti. How do your countries assess the number of reserves that you need and their readiness should conflict break out?
The assessment is made through the war plans. That we were using historical data, how many losses, and very carefully looking for Ukraine, assessing not only how many losses we are taking and what can be done to lessen them, but also looking for our medical system, how many people and how fastly we can actually bring back to because this is not only the one-way street in the losses, but how you bring back your troops and put them fight again. And this is important for us, and we are honestly learning a lot from not only from Ukraine, but with the more conflicts what we have previously from Iraq and Afghanistan, we were dealing with the wounded and people who get injured.
Yes, we have some 280,000 troops in our reserves, and so we would like to distribute them into operational troops and the kind of regional troops. Of course, like my colleague said, we plan this together with NATO so that they match the NATO regional plans, and some of those operational troops will be chopped, so change of command to NATO regional commands, and so on. Of course, we also have to understand that the companies, civilian companies, the local government, they need workforce during the crisis times as well. So we have to keep up the production. So 280,000 is a good number, even though we could probably arm like 950,000.
It's not an exact science, is it?
It's not an exact size, but 280 is what we have listed, equipped at the moment, and then okay, there's some pressure, so we can come up with the numbers, and we're investigating maybe 20,000-30,000 more.
It's a lot more than we have. A question finally to both of you. The UK government has said it wants to learn war readiness best practice from NATO allies in the Nordic and Baltic regions. If you had one key learning from your own country's experience to share with us today, what would that be?
It's a really difficult question, because what we have is not one significant silver bullet, but actually a systematic approach. And this is systematic approach is connected with how we run not only the military force, but how we run the governments and how we run the country, basically. And this is built up very systematically, and the dots are connected with different kind of legislative support, as well as resource allocation for the different parts. I would say that systematic approach to the problem and building up really significantly, having some reserve power in it.
Okay, since you almost told my silver bullet, so I would love to say that trust that's the key word. Trust in all levels between the authorities, between the population and the authorities. Nothing works without trust, and but once again, trust is a culture. It takes a lot of time to build. It's not a silver bullet to that extent. But
may I?
Very, very briefly, 30 seconds.
First of all, Lord Hutton talked about the defence readiness legislation which is proposed in the Strategic Defence Review. The danger is that is seen as only kicks in at time of war or time of conflict. You actually need to be preparing now. How would we galvanise, for example, British industry to produce thousands of drones? Where indeed is our counter-drone defence? The other point I would want to make, if I may, is that final point about trust is critical. And what we've also got happening at the moment is the continual undermining of trust, not only in the political process, in democracy itself, but in the authorities and everything else. And that is being driven in part by social media, the manipulation of social media, and some of that is very actively being driven by hostile nations. And it's a win-win for them if they undermine the faith of our population in our national institutions and national structures, then we are more vulnerable.
I'm just going to move on to Sir Gavin Williamson. I'm just conscious of time because we started late, and I really wanted to finish this panel by 5:30. So, Sir Gavin, briefly, if you could.
Thank you ever so much. I always remember having the privilege of visiting Estonia and being incredibly impressed by how you are looking at mobilising not just your own armed forces regulars, but how is a whole societal measure. But what is equally impressive by both Finland and Estonia is just actually how your reserves reach far further than just sort of what would sometimes be seen as traditional military, but also especially in the area of cyber security as well. And I just wondered what lessons have you got as to how you make people understand that reserve forces can be so much more than what people maybe traditionally think as maybe armed forces roles, and how have both your countries gone about doing that?
In Estonia, we're using a lot the civil skills, because what the reserves bring in is their educational background as well as their professional background. And you are getting really diverse background from education point of view, especially. And if you have a ET nation where there's info technologies run at the banks, different kind of companies, those people will join in at some point to the military service as well. And if you create also the framework where they can work together as for defense, and the companies are trusting, like my Finnish colleague pointed out, also the system to others not to steal their trade secrets, the cyber can be actually, in cyber things, protection need to be done in wide area of services, and that's mean that you involving the knowledge and also the civilian companies to defend yourself. This is not the only governmental task to defend.
I would like to highlight the voluntary exercises our reservists do together. There's the reservist training organization. Okay, the armed forces, we give them support. We give them personal information. There's lots of involvement of the armed forces, but in general, that's the reservists that they arrange these trainings. They work as the trainers, and the kind of the basic idea is to bring right-minded people together. To teach and learn from each other. And once you combine that with really flexible capability, so that we can take, my previous job, I was the head of the defensive cyber in the Finnish Armed Forces. So I could basically task my people to call civilian specialists out of who are set in our primary reserves.
Yes.
To ask them if you can come and take a look at this. They could jump off their civilian duty for a day or two and come in, and then just go back. No papers, no orders. Yeah. It's as flexible as it can get.
Just very quick one. If you were recommending to our Prime Minister, in the UK, about 0.3% of the population are involved in regular and reserved armed forces. Obviously, it's much higher in Finland and Estonia. What sort of percentage would you recommend a country like UK should be involved in our regular and reserves?
We have different tasks in hand, and the reserve things is not only about the numbers, how to raise the numbers, but also about the quality. And I would say that in some areas, especially like with cyber and other things, there is better to have more quality than quantity.
If I could just, make a comment. There's a lack of clarity about what our plans are for home defence. The National Security Strategy, I think, says it will focus on the protection of the critical national infrastructure and countering sabotage during a crisis. Query, should it be before the crisis or whatever. But does that mean that these reserves are going to be armed? Because certainly you would expect armed forces to be protecting your nuclear installations or other key things. It's deeply unhelpful, and I don't know whether this was the imagination of a sort of newspaper sub-editor or an over-enthusiastic sort of press officer to talk about a modern dad's army. What we're actually talking about is precisely what's been said in terms of our colleagues from Finland and Estonia, that this is about marshalling the skills that you have in the community, knowing what you've got available and making the best use of them. We will need plumbers, we will need people who know about welding, we will need people who are able to do all sorts of things under emergency conditions or near emergency conditions, and I'm not sure we're anywhere near being able to mobilise them.
Finally, let me turn to Bill Esterson.
Thanks very much, Chair. Lord Harris, you were talking about the short timeframes involved in climate breakdown. Can I return to that briefly? Do you think we need to do more to raise awareness and ensure people are ready for the scale of the threat, the immediacy of the threat from things like food or population movements.
Very good. My refrain is a lot more should be being done. People who are in areas which are vulnerable to flooding are probably reasonably well prepared for that, but increasingly floods are occurring, for example, flash floods, even in central London. These are things which people haven't experienced in the past. We have extreme heat events. Was it 3 years ago? We had 40-degree temperatures in central London. We discovered, for example, that office IT systems don't function at that level, all sorts of other problems, extra deaths and so on. We need to be looking at how we respond under those circumstances. So all of those are things that people need to be taking on board, and I suspect a lot more should be being done to try and bring people's awareness and educate them as to what are the sorts of sensible things that they should be doing, both as individuals or within the organisations they work in.
Well, thank you for that. I'll turn to your two colleagues on the panel and to ask what more you think the UK can do within NATO to contribute to areas like Europe's energy infrastructure and to prepare for disruption there, or indeed from other major infrastructure issues and challenges.
I'm not expert in energy, and I noticed quite a difficult if we are being to view also the nuclear part, but I'm not taking any stand here.
I would take up two suggestions. Okay, one is the common understanding inside Europe. What is going on? Where is our adversary? Talking about Russia. What are they doing? What is their fleet doing? And combine that situational understanding. Then the second where UK could be even a bigger player is the cyber capability. You have very strong capability in the cyber domain, and there's plenty of things you could share with the rest of Europe and NATO.
As a nation, we are very, very dependent on imported food. Very easy to disrupt those supply chains. In energy, as we're moving towards more of a net zero environment, we will require capacity to store energy. That means we will have to have access to critical minerals which are not indigenous to this country or very difficult to extract in this country. If you start to look through all the key manufacturing functions in this country, you will find we are very dependent on what is coming in from overseas. If that is disrupted, that is going to present real difficulties.
And then I think, Chair, with the time, just one final question about whether the Estonian or Finnish governments are looking at how to work better or more closely with industry to incentivise the private sector to prioritise resilience, particularly where they're providing critical national infrastructure.
Yeah, there are plans how to work together with the industries and how to support industries in order to have not only their profits but also looking for the resilience of their organization and ensure that their services are provided. And this is done in the cooperation with several agencies, and in some cases the civilian companies had thought to the table to plan together with the governmental agencies or local governments. Let's say about the water supply, about energy supplies, all those vital services are part of our planning efforts.
Yeah, we are not discussing currently on bringing new tasks to the ministries, but we have shared our legislation into, if I remember correctly, it's about roughly 46 strategic tasks which have been shared between the ministries, and each one goes down from national level, or from international to national to regional to local level, and we know who's supposed to be responsible in each kind of case and who are the actors. So we are more or less built this capability, and of course it depends on the company size how much we utilize some civilian companies' expertise in supporting this.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. That concludes our first panel session. Many thanks to you, Captain Ravanti, to you, General Rebo, and of course to you, Lord Harris, as well. Thank you for your evidence, which will be incredibly valuable as we go forward in our analysis and critique of the national security strategy. Order, order. Order. We will now start with our second panel in this, our third session on the national security strategy. And it's my pleasure to welcome Lisa Hollins, co-chair of the Voluntary and Community Sector Emergencies Partnership. Welcome. And to Steve Vincent, who joins us virtually. Steve, who's just confirmed that he sits, or is rather the strategic manager of the West Midlands Local Resilience Forum. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Chair.
We have four main areas of investigation that we'd like to put before you. And I'm sorry we're starting that bit later due to, I think, some traffic issues. We will aim to complete by 6:10, if that's okay with you. Thank you very much. Baroness Tyler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I turn to you, Mr. Vincent, first? We started in the previous session to explore a little the role of local resilience forums. And I wondered if you could say how, in your opinion, how effectively government is coordinating with these local resilience forums when it comes to emergency preparedness and planning. And specifically, what could the government do if it really wanted to improve the, if you like, the clarity of roles and responsibilities on the public sector resilience system? If you like, do you think the accountability and the transparency is sort of good enough at the moment?
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of the local resilience forums, there is good communication through the MHCLG and the government liaison officers. However, the local resilience forum up and down the country mean different things to different people. Yes, we all come under the Civil Contingencies Act, but they are supported in different ways and has different emphases, which has allowed to subsidiarity in terms of decision making. But when thinking of your last session in terms of being able to coordinate some of the main issues that we may need in terms of resilience, that has caused some considerations in terms of ongoing and how the longevity of some of the plans could be. Because in essence, in some local resilience forums, you've probably got 40 plus organisations, both from the public sector and the utilities, which will be having to work together with all of the differing priorities that their individual government departments will place upon them, and not having the commonality, not always having the commonality that you'd expect from one local resilience forum trying to deliver in an area.
Thanks very much for that. could I sort of turn to the funding arrangements for local resilience forums? I think the Resilience Action Plan talks about an intention to provide sustainable funding, I think is the term,
That's correct.
for through launching these Resilience Forum capacity and capability funding to help with that. I'm not sure what stage that's at, what involvement that you are having, whether you feel that is indeed going to be sufficient to provide you with sustainable funding. Are you able just to expand on that?
So in terms of Local Resilience Forum, some of the funding comes through in kind or from local finance coming from the individual public sector organisations and utilities. And then there's also been funding from central government against certain priorities over the last few years. We've just come to the end of a single year in terms of the finances, and we were going to have a 3-year settlement, but that is still to be finalised because of some of the changes within central government in terms of portfolios, in terms of ministers. But it's still on a rolling 3-year, and it could change at any time depending on, obviously, the Treasury demands.
So I noted that the Centre for Long-Term Resilience described the funding landscape for resilience as, I think, and I quote, marked by opacity and inconsistency. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's a bit too stark?
No, actually, there is a lot of inconsistency up and down the country where you will have some partners contributing to some LRFs and other partners not, and they could be the same agency in different parts of the countries. And actually, the amount that is actually put into that central pot for the local resilience to work as a single entity is inconsistent. Remembering that actually the LRF, in essence, isn't an entity. It's a collaboration of partners and really doesn't have any powers on partners to make those contributions. It's a collective of the willing against a general action plan that's set there.
Right. Okay. No. Thanks. That's very helpful. Ms. Hollins, could I turn to you and just ask you initially? Do you feel that the government is getting the most it could out of the skills and resources within the voluntary sector, the wider voluntary faith community sector, when it comes to resilience, or is there more it could be doing?
I think there's been some very positive moves over the last few years, which have really benefited both sides. The Resilience Action Plan is a real indication of acknowledging the role of the voluntary sector, strengthening local connections, which is absolutely critical to make sure we have resilient communities. I think there needs to be much more detail in the moving forward, how we do have areas such as the national conversations on resilience. How can we make sure people take the actions that they need to, and how can we ensure the voluntary sector and organisations can support people who can't take those actions and need to be supported. So there is a huge amount more that we could be doing, and one of the really critical things is coordination, and you may know that the voluntary and communities sector emergencies partnership, one of our large areas is communication. We were set up after Grenfell, when communication and coordination between voluntary sector agencies wasn't what it should be, and we have been doing a huge amount to make sure that that's in place, but more still needs to be done. So what we want to see is that local resilience forums that always include their voluntary community and faith sector colleagues, and it's a mixed picture across England and across the UK, and that needs to be better, I think, and we need to have minimum standards of engagement to make sure people get what they need in local communities, and we all work towards that level of coordination that we need to move forward.
Thank you for that. And could I ask, when it comes to some of the sort of the bigger, if you like, the more strategic discussions going on in the whole area of resilience planning and preparedness, do you feel that you are properly engaged at the outset? Do you feel like you're an equal partner around the table, or do you feel like you're someone who people, come to when they finally remember the important role that the sector plays?
I think it is mixed. We've had great discussions with the Cabinet Office, and they've been really open about engaging us, and we had quite an active role in the Resilience Action Plan, so we welcomed that. I think it's just making sure that there are standards which everybody adheres to around involving the voluntary and community sector at all levels, at a national level, at a local level, and there's consistency, and that consistency is measured. So it's not a nice to have, it's an integral part of the work. And what we've learned from our last pandemic and from tragedies like Grenfell is that people are disproportionately impacted, and there is a real role for the voluntary sector in communicating, persuading people. So we would want to make sure there are minimum standards of engagement, but we see that the engagement has got much better.
Right, okay, well that's good to hear. And could I finally sort of ask you also about funding? I mean, the government, I think, has outlined funding commitments to the sector through both the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Yeah. Do you understand this to be new funding, or is it basically reiterating arrangements that have already been agreed and set out and announced?
So the funding from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, that will be formalised. So that was 1 year funding, and that is going to be formalised now in a longer time period, which is much welcome because most organisations struggle to exist on annual funding. I think the funding from MHCLG is, I think that's time-limited funding, that has been time-limited funding, so I think that has come to an end now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sybil. Thank you. I'd like to come back to you, Mr. Vincent. Can we just step back just for a moment? I want to come back to the structure and systems around the LRFs in a moment. But if we just take a step back, you're responsible for one of the country's maybe most mature LRFs. What are the decisive enablers of a resilient public sector?
In terms of the LRF and being decisive, he's obviously working in the cooperation between the partners and actually ensuring that the communities actually understand that the risks that we're facing. I think one of the challenges that we have as in the West Midlands and in the wider LRFs is understanding what do we mean by community resilience that's been talked about in the new standards and in new guidance, and having a commonality about how do we integrate the voluntary sector and the communities in terms of our response plans. My colleague had just mentioned in terms of Grenfell and post-Grenfell, in terms of how perhaps there was a missed opportunity in engaging the community in terms of the overall response and therefore the recovery of that area. I think if we were to look at that in the widest aspect, that is something that we would want to look to grow within the LRF. But this goes back to the fundamental is what do we mean by societal resilience, and each of us have got a part to play in that.
What do you mean by societal resilience?
Well, for me, it's about, if you think about the communities, if you look at a national power outage as an example, we know that there are a number of factors that the communities would suffer from, which is about water, food, heating. How resilient is the community of being able to look after itself or look after its community in terms of an event happening straight away? Would they be in shock, or would they know what to do? And I think a key bit for us moving forward, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the West Midlands Fire and Civil Defence Authority and actually working in education and working in schools. And I think in terms of making our whole society more resilient, we need to take that whole society approach of looking at how are we working from central government top down and from the locality up in terms of bringing that together. And a key component that I think we need to bring back into the resilience world is education from early doors all the way through, because as your previous panel talked about, when you're looking at culture change and building these societal changes, it does take years to do, and we need to take that with an urgent approach, would be my opinion.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Mr. Vincent, on the LRFs themselves, just pursuing some of the points that Baroness Tyler touched on. But Ms. Hollins, let me come to you, just societal resilience.
Yes, to me that is about how a society can bounce back after a shock, a major shock or a major crisis. That's I suppose the strict definition. And what we know from the pandemic and other crises is that some people bounce back really quickly and some don't. And we can predetermine who won't bounce back quickly because we know those issues that impact on people, such as poverty, those social determinants of health, which are absolutely social determinants of crisis. We know which members of our society will have less choices, less options, and will struggle to bounce back in the same way. So when we are thinking about societal resilience, we need to make sure people who can help themselves do help themselves, and hopefully they can help others, and make sure the people who are going to struggle for all sorts of different reasons have people to support them. So it's how we construct that with the local resilience forums and other agencies to make sure that everybody has what they need.
I'd like about different communities, Ms. Hollins. So, I live in an area which looked after people well during the pandemic because it's a stable community. Not many people move around. There's a strong voluntary ethos in that community, and so essentially just rallied around. It didn't need an awful lot of state help and support. They just got on with it. Because we know there are other communities, particularly in areas where populations are more transient, community relations aren't as strong, where it's more challenging. How do we deal with that variation?
Yeah, so this is where the voluntary sector could really come in and help, because in areas where populations are more transient, actually there is usually a huge amount and array of voluntary and community organisations that can and will step in. And we saw some great examples during vaccine hesitancy of all sorts of different groups stepping in to support, and this is really a key role that we could ask people to help in. But when we think of the evidence around when people don't bounce back, poverty is a major critical factor, and poverty, we know about how many people in our society face poverty. Certainly they will have fewer choices, and we saw certainly within the pandemic people living in multi-generational households. These are all the factors that we know people will struggle, and it's constructing a network of organisations around that can support. So to do that, we need really good coordination and communication at a local level. So we need the local resilience forums being very strong at linking with local community and faith groups, because those are the people who will influence people who face the greatest challenges. So that's the way we're going to make a difference in that area.
Thank you. I think one of my colleagues is going to come back and pursue some of those points with you in a moment. Mr. Vincent, just back to you, just briefly on the LRFs themselves. Lessons from the Trailblazer LRFs?
Unfortunately, there's not as many trailblazers, to my knowledge, have taken place, and therefore still waiting. I mean, one of the things that we would hope within the sector, and I'm saying we here, is that that was supposed to end by 2030. I would suggest, from my personal experience, that's too long, because going back to what your previous panel was talking about, in some respects, we need to have the structures in place now, ready to start building on all the good work that we're talking about, and enabling our communities to build that resilience, ready for any shocks that may come to us, from whether that's natural or foreign enemy in terms of the land. And therefore, I would urge some form of structure to look at. We want LRFs to be looking like and working like, needs to come way before 2030.
Thank you. Speaking as a former civil servant, the the way the government is approaching this feels quite civil servicey, if I can use that phrase. So talking about leadership, local accountability, or caricatured of civil service, I should really say, because we're not all like that. But do the government's current priorities, leadership, local accountability, data sharing, peer review, etc., do those really capture the main constraints, or is there something more fundamental in your view? Because those sounds like that's all about process rather than substance.
For me, I would say I would be looking for leadership and priorities are the key bit in terms of LRF, and having the resource and the funding, and not disabling LRS by maybe conflicting legislation that stops maybe partners from working more collaboratively together and joining up that work. What I would say to you, and we need to enable our communities. If you look at all the work that's done in all the different partners, they all have slightly different emphases in terms of what that is. The LRF at the moment does not have the legitimacy to say to partners, this is where we need to work and how we should be working, because it's not within the civil contingent. We talk about warn and inform, not about building that societal resilience. And I do say we need to work more collaboratively with the voluntary sector and build on all of their good experience. But we do need to have a collective message of what does that really mean for for all of us to work collaboratively together, because it means different things to different people currently.
And just briefly, the updated national resilience standards, but I note an absence of timelines in the resilience action plan. Do those genuinely strengthen capability, or is this just more process?
I think it's a good start. The difficulty would be is what does good look like? And that's not really articulated. And also in terms of peer review can work, but unfortunately, where's the capacity in everybody's working to full capacity? So with the absence of what good looks like moving forward, but we didn't have them before, but have we really tested them out currently?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
It's quite striking, sort of, in terms of not knowing what good looks like, but then also that there isn't a proper kind of audit process in terms of, we talk about peer review, but kind of auditing how things could work in certain eventualities and so on. And I was really struck by your use of the word legitimacy. But let me pass on to Lord Berting.
Thank you, Ms. Hollins, for your work as co-chair of the Voluntary and Community Sector Emergencies Partnership. Both you and Mr. Vincent mentioned Grenfell. Now, I am co-chair of the Grenfell Memorial Commission, and I, as a young man, worked as a community lawyer in that particular neighbourhood in the voluntary sector. In my experience, whilst the local and national government and services failed the community in Grenfell, the churches actually and the mosques, the religious organisations, delivered to that community. So I wonder if you could outline for us what added value you think the voluntary community and faith sector bring to national resilience, and tell us candidly about the obstacles and your concerns about your future ability in that sector to deliver on this, because I do have to tell you and to fess up to the fact that I was Home Office Minister responsible for the voluntary sector, and I was Chief Secretary subsequently. And in my experience, successive governments of all political persuasions talk the talk about the voluntary sector, but actually, when push comes to shove, they don't actually back it up with resource and with coordinated cross-departmental action. So tell us where we are today and where you think we have to go.
Thank you. It's a big question. I will do my very best. So what I've seen over the last, I suppose, 5 years or so is a voluntary sector that is very keen to work together and very keen to work with the public sector, with government, and a realisation that we are all in this together. And the coordination that Steve was describing, it's absolutely critical that every group or organisation in a local area. When a crisis happens, they're all pulling in the same direction. So I think I would agree completely with Steve that people need to work in collaboration, and for that to happen, the coordination and communication and trust needs to be there, and that needs to be there prior to crises happening. And there's a big role for government and for public sector to reach out more, I think, and make sure that the systems and structures that are in place embrace the organisations needed within that local area to deliver what's needed to the local community. So what I have found is that there is a significant difference across local resilience forums, and that will stop the voluntary sector getting involved. There needs to be minimum standards, I feel, in terms of collaboration to make sure that coordination and communication, which is so important, happens at a satisfactory level. And of course, as you will know, what local community groups do is they really know the vulnerable people within their local area and look out for them. So they're critical information givers as well as service providers in those local areas. So coordination, structure, and communication is really important. And then for other areas where the voluntary sector could and should help is around the difficult issues of polarisation and lack of and concerns around community cohesion. Voluntary groups play an enormous role in all emergencies, and you'll have seen with the tragic events a few weeks ago in Manchester. The faith communities of Manchester gathered together to show a united front, and at the vigil over the last week we're very present together, and we're united and collaborated very closely. So this is really important to show how we work together, work really closely, and that is what makes a better local community. And then in terms of other area, I just wanted to I suppose to finish off on what good looks like. I think I would repeat around structure, coordination, communication. But things won't change unless we are a bit more specific about what the good measures of a good society and good resilience looks like. So we need to delve into that a bit more. And if you look at education or health or other areas, they have some very clear evidence-based frameworks. There's less within resilience, so we need to put our mind to developing those to make sure we can produce those measures like other areas have. And then I think finally on funding, I think the Resilience Action Plan very neatly sidesteps the issue of funding, because there is it says please don't give the community groups any more work because they don't have enough resources at the moment. So I think if we're to take an active role, I think the issue of funding really needs to be addressed.
And my sense is, listening to your answer to Baroness Tyler, that you don't actually know whether or not there's going to be new funding, let alone how much money there's going to be made available. I don't see the evidence of new funding.
There isn't. Following the Resilience Action Plan, the next steps are not clear, the funding's not clear, so we're not at the stage where we can say that's explicit.
Thank you very much.
Just finally, if we could just come back to you, Steve, and that is how your LRF works with voluntary groups, faith groups, and so on. Give us some ideas of what that looks like.
So we've recognised that we've got work to do in that area, and we're actually got a project working this year in terms of starting to build those connections and enabling that moving forward. And we're working through that currently in terms of what part can play. Because what I'd say is at the moment in the UK, when you look at the communities, over like on the continent or in other countries, where the actual community itself and the community groups are the first responders. You know, for 32 years, I was a firefighter and a strategic commander within the fire service, and I was seen as a first responder. Actually, the first responders are the community themselves when something happened, whether it's a fire, flood, or whether there's some other catastrophe. They're there usually supporting. I think it's what we are looking to do is how can we enable that? And you know, my colleague talked about health inequalities as a disenabler for people to be able to make choices. The actual benefits of actually tackling those aspects actually starts to energise our communities. And I think what we need to the UK Resilience Academy is now looking at professionalising the service in moving forwards, and us needing to see that the community should be at the forefront of the plans right at the beginning of understanding the risks in their area, understanding how we work on those, and looking, instead of the causation of them, looking at the outcomes of those flooding or that national power outage, in terms of how do we get food, how do we make sure people are warm, how do we communicate with each other, how do we understand where those key messages are? Because at the moment, if you went into your communities, very few people will understand what a local resilience forum is. They won't understand what resilience needs to be. We need to bring it to life, and we only can do that by working with all of the assets that we have within our toolbox, and the biggest asset is our community.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for that. We've run slightly over time, but can I thank you both, Lisa and Steve, for coming in and giving us your evidence today and sharing with us your experience and knowledge of the sector. It's quite telling, really, where we find ourselves and just how much more we could do. And I think when you're talking about where the risks are, there are some obvious risks out there. But then you think back to the Southport attack last summer and how a community suddenly had to galvanize itself out of nothing. And we just maybe need to think about how we're set up as a society to prepare us for the unexpected, because there are potential floods, of course. There are potential attacks from state actors or proxies. But then there are all sorts of other challenges to our communities and our societies, which I think your evidence has alluded to. So thank you very much for your time today, and that completes our second panel and this evidence session. Order.